require immunization for a sexually transmitted infection, I think there is no public interest to be served, and certainly not enough of a public interest to override the liberty issue. We don't know how long immunity will last. We don't know how effective it will be at actually preventing cancer. It will be years before we know that.
Dr. Joseph DeSoto, who lives in Martinsburg, West Virginia, also has grave concerns over the Guardasil vaccine. DeSoto is a cancer researcher for the National Institutes of Health.
It does not cover most subtypes. It only covers about 10% of the subtypes. It is true that the 4 subtypes that it does cover currently are responsible for 70% of the cervical cancers. However, once they're suppressed, the other subtypes, again, will obtain an evolutionary advantage in growth, and they will become dominant. This vaccine will have absolutely no effect against those subtypes. These are incomplete vaccines which will not do what they're supposed to do, and that's prevent cervical cancer. What's even more disturbing is that this vaccine has not been adequately tested in 9 to 12-year-olds, and this is the age group in which the proposals are focused towards.
Now, besides the freedom issue, whereby you decide whether you want your child pumped full of drugs or not, there is also the issue of the vaccine safety. If you're astute at all when you're reading this information, you'll see that they use the word may. It may cure cancer in these particular strains, or it may do this, or it may do that. You can tell when they're trying to cover their backsides when they use this sort of language. Now, at risk of being called an alarmist, I'd like you to listen to this interview with a mother of a child who was vaccinated with the virus, or rather the vaccination, and just to listen to the circumstances around the vaccination and what happened afterwards. Now, whoever's posted this video has chosen to put very disturbing music underneath it, which I find just detracts from the information. But try to ignore that and listen to what the mother is actually saying.
If I knew then what I know now, I would have never vaccinated her. They just made it sound like this was the prevention of cervical cancer. I thought I was doing right by my daughter. Right, well, I took her to the pediatrician for her yearly physical because she participates in cheerleading at her school, and it's mandatory that you have a physical every year. She was a perfectly healthy child. It was presented to me by the physician's assistant that I get my daughter the vaccine, which I had seen on the media, I had seen on the commercials that it prevents cervical cancer. And I, of course, was concerned and asked about the side effects. And she had told me that it's the typical redness at the site, some mild symptoms of fever, and any other type of flu-like symptoms. So at that point, I figured it was the best thing I could do for my daughter to prevent cervical cancer, and I consented to the vaccine, only to find out about 3 to 4 weeks later she developed vasculitis, which is a small blood vessel disease, and she has huge purple lesions that are blistery, that are covering her lower extremities, and it also it has affected her intestines, where she's had a little bit of rectal bleeding. And I'm concerned about her future in terms of kidney disease, because I understand it can go into your kidneys. And knowing what I know now, after the fact, I would have never had her vaccinated.
Now, on this vaccine, it was not explained to you that it was the first genetically altered vaccine, and they didn't also tell you that it only targets 4 out of more than 100 strains of HPV?
No. Well, she received the first one November 1st, 2006. We were supposed to return in January, but after she had developed the vasculitis, I myself was convinced it was from the vaccine.
So with one shot, your healthy daughter developed this?
Yes.
Thank God she didn't get 3.
Now, there's a belief out there that these vaccines protect you from the disease. That's a belief. That's not evidence, and it's not proof. There isn't a shred of evidence that one vaccine, not one shot, ever kept one person from getting sick. But there's tons of evidence that vaccines have caused lots of sickness and killed lots of people. But we assume it, and we believe it, and we act accordingly. Now, I'm making my choice, and you're going to make your choice. But the purpose of these broadcasts is to give you an opportunity to look into the aspect and make an informed and more intelligent choice. It's not an intelligent choice to be vaccinated without looking into it. Now, some of you out there will say, well, I don't want this vaccination, but I'm really afraid, and I don't know how to deal with the school officials. I don't know how to deal with the government. I don't know how to deal with the law. Now, if you go into an alternative healthcare practitioner, that's any chiropractor, any naturopath, look them up in the Yellow Pages. Call them and ask them, do you have any information concerning vaccines? Do you have a waiver form? Because I'd like to claim a religious exemption or a medical exemption. They will give you a booklet that will give you some idea as to what you can and can't do with regards to these vaccines and the exemptions that are available to you. If not, ask him to refer you to someone he can. Now, in all of your contact with any of these schools, public health, or legal establishments, always try and remain calm and courteous and humbly reverent to their position. You're only asking of them that which the law duty binds them to give to you. There's no advantage to be gained by antagonizing them or giving them the finger. Most of these public officials actually believe the lies they've been fed regarding these vaccinations. They've no ill will towards you at all. They just believe it. They're completely sincere. It's up to you. Bring the true facts to their attention without trying to belittle them. The more you can preserve the ego, the more easily and quickly and more likely you are to get what you desire, which is a vaccination waiver. Now, you might have to get a little strong. You might have to say, listen, let me explain this to you. If you want to shoot my kid up, then you just go right ahead and take full responsibility. And take full responsibility for any adverse reactions. I'm telling you, I'm opposed to it. I don't want it. Do not do it. But if you insist that the law requires it, you take full responsibility. And if my kid turns out to be autistic, I'm going to sue you. If the kid dies, I'm going to sue you for wrongful death. I want you, school nurse. I want you, teacher. I want you, school principal, to take 100% liability for the adverse reactions that may come from this event. And if you're willing to do that, if you want us to believe that these vaccines are 100% benign and there will be no adverse reactions, you shouldn't have any problem with that. Don't expect me to give you permission to sign the agreement. And then when the kid turns out to be autistic, you turn around and say, well, you should have known. You're a parent. You should have taken responsibility. You should have taken the religious exemption. You should have taken the medical exemption. Now, you're not going to get any authority figure or teacher or nurse or pharmaceutical company to take responsibility for that vaccine because they're not stupid. They're in business to make money, not in business to take responsibility for your child. Now, don't ever think for a minute that the school nurse has a duty to offer you the exemption. Their duty is to get your kid shot up. And if you don't want that kid shot up, that's up to you to take a stand. If you can't take a stand, then sit down, shut up, and get that shot. Rights are only afforded to the belligerent claimant in person, not to those who cannot claim their rights because they don't know them. If you're ignorant of your rights, you can't claim them. If you're ignorant, you do not have any rights, period. You can only have the rights that you know how to claim. The next time someone looks at you seriously and says it's the law, you just be smart enough to say, I understand that, and I want to comply with the law. Now give me the waiver. Now if the authority comes up to your door and says it's compulsory vaccination, and if you don't vaccinate, we will arrest you. You need to be smart enough to say, okay, arrest me. I'm opposed to the vaccination. I'm not going to voluntarily vaccinate. You arrest me, go ahead. But you should be aware that if you arrest me and vaccinate me, there is potential for a civil rights action against you personally, because you should have known that this is a voluntary action. Let's go and produce evidence, witnesses and testimony, and then maybe you can vaccinate me and maybe you can't. They're going to do everything they can to intimidate you, to threaten you, to make you believe that you have to do this. And if you don't do it, something bad's going to happen to you. Be smart enough to comply with the law. There are no compulsory vaccination laws. All vaccination laws are voluntary. Now, if you volunteer for the vaccination and there are any adverse effects, and you go in and try to sue the authorities, you're going to lose. You did it under your own power. There's a big difference between being cunningly coerced to waive your rights and actually having your rights taken away from you against your will and over your objection. There's a big difference between being a passive wallflower and being an objector, a belligerent objector. And that's what law is all about. Law is where the line's drawn in the sand. It empowers you to know what you can do and what you can't do. You need to study your rights. And I hope you got something out of this whole presentation. It was fascinating for me to look into, and I certainly couldn't put everything that I found into this video because of time constraints, but hopefully it will inspire you to look into it a little further and certainly make a more informed choice before you decide to hand your daughter over to Merck. As I suggested at the beginning of this broadcast, there is something a little more sinister going on here that I believe you need to look into. Research the Georgia Guidestones and look into the eugenics project. The eugenics issue is a very, very controversial one and a very touchy subject. You're going to have to sort the wheat from the chaff on that one because there are lots of videos out there that deal with very esoteric ideas. But on the other hand, there are some very credible sources and some very credible information that show that the powers that be do not have your interests at heart when it comes to these vaccination programs and other things like it. Again, please take the time to rate it if you haven't already done so, and thanks for listening.